The siren's wail, a mournful cry cutting through the pre-dawn chill, had been my alarm clock for years. This morning, though, it was just background noise, a distant echo as I navigated the university campus in my old sedan. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something acrid, a chemical tang that clung to the damp asphalt. Another lab incident, another late-night call. My gut always tightened at the word accident in a facility like this. Accidents were rarely just accidents, especially when genius and billions of dollars were involved. I parked behind a cluster of emergency vehicles, their strobes painting the brick buildings in a frantic dance of red and blue. The scene was already cordoned off, yellow tape flapping like an impatient flag in the nascent breeze. A grim-faced detective, his uniform rumpled, met me at the perimeter. He didn't need to tell me it was bad. The sheer scale of the response already spoke volumes. "Reid," the detective said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Thanks for coming. Thorne's lab, total devastation." I nodded, pulling on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves. "Dr. Aris Thorne, the bioengineer, what happened?" "Initial reports say a catastrophic equipment failure, possible chemical explosion, maybe suicide, though we're not ruling out a tragic miscalculation." The man was brilliant, but apparently, he played fast and loose with safety protocols sometimes. He gestured towards the main entrance of the research wing, a gaping maw of twisted metal and shattered reinforced glass. "Body's been moved already to the University Medical School cadaver storage facility. They'll do the preliminary autopsy there, but the scene, it's yours." My gaze swept over the building. Thorne's lab was infamous for its cutting-edge, high-security design. To see it like this, gutted and exposed, was jarring. It looked less like a lab and more like a war zone. Firefighters were still hosing down smoldering debris, their beams cutting through the lingering smoke. The air tasted of burnt plastic and something metallic, a coppery tang that suggested more than just a typical lab fire. Inside, the destruction was absolute. The main research area was a mosaic of scorched walls and mangled steel. Advanced workstations, once gleaming with their complex arrays of monitors and robotic arms, were now melted husks. I stepped carefully, my boots crunching on a carpet of shattered glass and pulverized plaster. My eyes, trained over 2 decades to pick out discrepancies in chaos, began their slow, methodical scan. The detective followed, his heavy footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "Fire department thinks it originated near the primary bioreactor array. Massive pressure buildup then." Boom. They found Thorne near the central console, vaporized almost beyond recognition. Lucky they even got enough to identify him. I didn't reply, my attention already elsewhere. I moved towards what remained of the bioreactor, a gnarled sculpture of blackened metal. The heat must have been immense enough to warp the heavy-gauge steel. Most of the blast damage radiated outwards as expected, charring everything in its path. But something caught my eye, a subtle anomaly amidst the widespread devastation. On a section of a high-density polymer workbench, just beneath a dangling, severed power conduit, I knelt. The surface here, while singed, hadn't been directly hit by the main force of the explosion. Yet there was a distinctive burn pattern, an intricate, almost crystalline etch, tracing a precise, narrow path. It was a dark, almost glassy residue, unlike the widespread, flaky soot that coated everything else. This wasn't the kind of burn I'd get from a general flash fire or a pressure wave. This looked directed, focused. I pulled out my portable spectral analyzer, a small handheld device that hummed softly as I passed it over the mark. The readings flashed across the screen, traces of a specific metallic oxide, not typically found in the standard reagents Thorne was known to use, nor consistent with the materials of the workbench itself. My internal alarm bells, usually a quiet chime, began to ring with a persistent urgency. A catastrophic equipment failure, they said. A miscalculation, suicide. But this burn, this precise, almost surgical scorch mark didn't fit that narrative. It was too controlled, too specific. It suggested a heat source that was both intense and localized, applied with deliberate intent, before the larger explosion, perhaps even triggering it. I straightened up, my gaze sweeping the room again, now with a fresh perspective. If someone had wanted to stage an accident, they'd done a hell of a job. But they hadn't accounted for the quiet persistence of a single anomalous burn. This wasn't just a lab gone wrong. This was something far more intricate, a puzzle piece that didn't belong to the picture they were trying to paint, and it meant my work had just begun. But there was something else, a flicker of something in the periphery of the chaos. I crouched, my gaze sweeping the scorched floor, ignoring the acrid tang that still clung to the air. The detective hovered nearby, a silent anchor, but I barely registered his presence. My attention was riveted on a small, almost imperceptible detail. A faint scorch mark, almost like a shadow, extended under a piece of fallen debris. A section of heavy-duty ventilation ducting, suggesting the debris had been moved after the initial charring. It was a tiny anomaly, easily dismissed in the larger devastation, but it snagged at my meticulous brain. Things don't usually move themselves post-explosion. I need to get to the medical examiner, I stated, standing abruptly. As soon as possible. The medical examiner, a no-nonsense woman with perpetually tired eyes, met me an hour later at the University Medical School cadaver storage facility. The air in the refrigerated room was thin and cold, carrying the faint, sterile scent of disinfectant and something else, something metallic and final. She gestured towards a gurney shrouded in a crisp white sheet. Just finished the initial external. I nodded, stepping closer. She pulled back the sheet, revealing Dr. Thorne. His features, usually sharp and intense in photographs, were now softened, almost waxy. The blast had been brutal. His clothes were singed, some areas fused to his skin. There were extensive thermal injuries, as expected, particularly across his torso and arms. Cause of death is clearly blast trauma and thermal shock. The medical examiner stated, her gloved fingers gently prodding a blackened area on Thorne's chest. No surprise there. Internal examination will confirm the extent of organ damage, lung barotrauma, that sort of thing. I circled the gurney, my eyes tracing the patterns of injury. The medical examiner was thorough, but he was looking for a catastrophic accident. I was looking for something else. Notice anything peculiar about the burns? I asked, pointing to a patch on Thorne's left forearm. The skin was deeply charred, but the edges were surprisingly clean, almost as if a protective barrier had been momentarily in place, then removed. She leaned in, her brow furrowing. Localized flash burning, consistent with proximity to a sudden, intense heat source. Maybe he was reaching for something or shielding himself. Or something was shielding him, I murmured, more to myself than to her. I moved to his hands, which were also badly burned, but again with an odd specificity. The medical examiner had already taken nail clippings, but I asked to examine them myself under a portable magnification lens I carried. My breath hitched. Tucked just under the cuticle of his right index finger, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a minute speck. It wasn't ash, nor was it a fragment of glass or metal from the lab. This particle shimmered with an almost iridescent quality, a faint, deep emerald green. It was microscopic, smaller than a pinhead, and utterly out of place. I gently scraped it onto a sterile slide. "What is it?" the medical examiner asked, peering over my shoulder. "I have no idea," I admitted, my mind racing. "But it doesn't look like anything from Thorne's lab, or any lab I've ever seen for that matter." It was too pristine, too singular, a unique, non-lab-related trace element. A seed of doubt, planted earlier in the ruined lab, was now sprouting. This wasn't just an accident. That green speck, the odd burn patterns, they spoke of interference. My first stop was Professor Thorne's department head, who directed me to a couple of names, starting with Dr. Silas Vance, a rival bioengineer. I found Vance in his office, a sterile space just a few floors down from Thorne's obliterated lab. He was a lean man, his glasses perched precariously on his nose, his expression a mix of feigned sorrow and barely concealed relief. "Tragic, truly tragic about Eris," Vance said, adjusting his spectacles. "Brilliant mind, but reckless, always pushing boundaries, never quite thinking of the consequences." "Were he and Dr. Thorne close?" I asked, watching his hands, which fidgeted with a pen. "Close, professionally perhaps. We were competitors, you see. Eris had a knack for anticipating breakthroughs. Sometimes my breakthroughs," Vance added, a bitter edge to his voice. "He was working on something big, something revolutionary, kept it under wraps, of course, typical Eris. Always wanted all the glory for himself." "Did you ever have disagreements?" Vance scoffed. "Disagreements? We had wars, Reid, academic wars. He once borrowed a key methodology from my unpublished paper just before I was about to present it. Cost me a grant. Eris could be ruthless, didn't care who he stepped on." My next interview was with Maya, a former research assistant. I tracked her down at a coffee shop near campus. "Thorne?" she repeated, stirring her coffee. "He was a genius, no doubt, but he was also a tyrant, demanding, secretive. He worked us to the bone, then took all the credit." "Why did I leave his lab?" She stared into her cup. "He fired me, said I wasn't dedicated enough. The truth. I questioned his methods. He was cutting corners, I thought, rushing things. He got paranoid if I so much as looked at his notes wrong, threatened to ruin my career if I breathed a word." "What kind of corners was he cutting?" "I don't know the specifics," she admitted, her voice dropping. "He kept his most sensitive work locked down, even from his own team, but I saw schematics, calculations, things that didn't add up. He was obsessed with getting this project finished, no matter the cost. He pushed everyone, including himself, to the breaking point, said it would change everything. The world, he said. As I walked away, the pieces began to shift in my mind. A ruthless rival, a disgruntled assistant, a brilliant but secretive man, and a shimmering emerald speck. This wasn't just a lab accident. This was a carefully constructed deception, and Thorne was at the center of a very dangerous game. The tension in my gut tightened. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make a murder look like a tragic miscalculation. And I had a feeling that Emerald Speck was going to tell me who. The following morning, the smell of ozone and disinfectant still clung to the air in Thorne's lab, a faint ghost of the chaos that had unfolded. I stood amidst the wreckage, a silent observer of the university's cleanup crew, who moved with practiced efficiency, cataloging and bagging what little remained of value. My own team was still processing the more minute details, the dust and residue that the initial blast had left behind. But my focus wasn't on the physical destruction anymore. It was on the digital footprint, the secrets Thorne had kept locked away in his servers. We've got a secure connection to the main server farm. The university's lead tech, a wiry man with perpetually smudged glasses, announced, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. It's not in the lab. Thankfully, too much heat for sensitive equipment. It's actually a sub-level beneath the University Medical School cadaver storage facility. They like the constant temperature and the isolation down there. My brows lifted. A strange place for a cutting-edge research server, but then again, Thorne was a strange man. Lead the way, I said, already anticipating the chilled air and the unique, sterile scent that would accompany such a location. The descent was a winding journey through service tunnels and disused corridors, eventually leading to a heavy, reinforced door marked only with a serial number. Beyond it lay a different world. A humming symphony of servers, racks stacked high with blinking lights, the air cool and dry, smelling faintly of metal and ozone. It was utterly silent save for the whirring fans, a stark contrast to the destruction above ground. All of Thorne's project files are supposed to be housed here, the university tech explained, gesturing towards a specific bank of servers. Highly encrypted, of course. We've managed to get past the initial layers with the admin credentials Thorne left, but the deeper project folders are proving stubborn. I watched as he typed, his fingers flying across the keyboard, lines of code scrolling rapidly across the monitor. My eyes scanned the file directories, looking for anything out of place, anything that screamed anomaly. Thorne's research, I knew, delved into advanced genetic sequencing, a field teetering on the edge of miracle and madness. The preliminary reports hinted at breakthroughs in disease resistance, but also whispered of potential applications in bioweaponry, a dual-edged sword that could reshape global health or unleash unimaginable devastation. There, the tech muttered, pointing to a series of log files. Look at the timestamps. There's been a significant amount of activity in the Project Chimera folder Thorne's core work within the last 72 hours. And not just reads, writes, edits, deletions. My gut tightened. Deletions? Thorne was deleting his own work right before his death. Not just deletions, the tech corrected, zooming in on a specific entry. Attempted deletions. A full wipe was initiated, but it was incomplete. Looks like the system crashed or was interrupted mid-process. And the methods used? They're sophisticated, not just a simple delete command. This was an expert trying to erase their tracks. I leaned closer, my gaze fixed on the screen. The log showed a pattern of file access, modification, and then a hurried, almost frantic attempt to scrub the data. It wasn't the work of an accident. It was the deliberate act of someone trying to bury a secret. And the incomplete wipe meant there was still a digital ghost, a fragment of what was almost lost. Can I recover any of it? I inquired, my voice low. We're trying, it'll take time, but the intriguing part is the access point. It wasn't from Thorne's personal terminal in the lab. It was an external login, routed through a proxy server, then a university guest account. Someone was trying very hard to hide their identity. Someone who knew Thorne's system well enough to bypass the initial security, but not well enough to completely erase the evidence. I mused, the emerald speck from the lab flashing in my mind. A meticulous, almost obsessive level of detail. Later, as I was gathering my notes, a colleague found Maya, Thorne's assistant, hovering near the periphery of the cordoned-off lab. I approached her, my voice gentle. Maya, do I have a moment? She flinched, then nodded slowly, her gaze darting around the still-damaged lab. I suppose so. We're trying to understand what happened. Dr. Thorne's research, his recent activities. Anything I can tell me would be helpful. She wrung her hands, her eyes fixed on a charred piece of equipment. He was different lately, more secretive, that his work was too important to fall into the wrong hands. Paranoid? I prompted, trying to keep my expression neutral. Not just paranoid, she insisted, her voice gaining a fragile edge. He believed he was being targeted. He told me just a few days ago that if anything happened to him, I should look for the hidden truth. He said it wasn't what it seemed. He even mentioned the emerald eye. My breath hitched, the emerald speck. My gaze met hers, and I saw not just fear, but a deep, unsettling conviction. Did he say anything else about this emerald eye? She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. Only that it was watching, always watching. She shuddered, pulling her thin sweater tighter around herself. He was so afraid, and now he's gone. I let her go, my mind reeling, data manipulation, an attempted wipe, an external access point, and Thorne's assistant confirming his paranoia, hinting at a hidden truth and an emerald eye. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was a clue, and it was screaming murder. The game was far more dangerous than I had initially imagined. The assistant's words, emerald eye, echoed in my head, a jarring counterpoint to the sterile hum of the forensic lab. I'd walked out of that interview feeling like I'd just been handed a piece of a puzzle that didn't quite fit the picture I was building. Data manipulation, an attempted wipe, external access, it all pointed to a deliberate act, not an accident. And now this emerald eye clue. Was it a code? A physical object? Thorne's paranoia, confirmed by his assistant, wasn't the ramblings of a madman. It was a warning. My first stop was back at my own lab, but the specific equipment I needed for a truly granular spectral analysis wasn't available there. This trace element, barely visible, required something beyond our standard issue gear. I made a call to a colleague in the university's pathology department, a specialist known for his work with rare biological and synthetic compounds. He agreed to let me use his advanced spectrometer, located in a research wing often repurposed for specialized forensic work. The air grew heavy with the distinctive, cloying scent of formaldehyde as I navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the University Medical School cadaver storage facility. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pallid glow on the numbered metal doors lining the walls. Each door was a silent vault, holding its secrets. I could practically feel the cold seeping from behind them, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the stark finality of death. My shoes squeaked faintly on the polished linoleum floor, the only sound apart from the distant rumble of an air conditioning unit. It wasn't a place I enjoyed, but the equipment I needed was here, tucked away in a small, windowless room at the very end of the hall, past rows of storage units. The spectral analyzer itself was a formidable piece of machinery, a sleek black monolith bristling with delicate sensors and a high-resolution display. My colleague, a lanky man with perpetually tired eyes, gave me a quick rundown of its operation before excusing himself, leaving me alone with the machine and the microscopic speck I'd carefully extracted from Thorne's lab. I meticulously loaded the sample, a sliver almost invisible to the naked eye, into the analyzer's chamber. The machine whirred to life, a low, resonant thrum filling the quiet room. On the monitor, a complex array of peaks and valleys began to form, a unique spectral fingerprint of the unknown material. I cross-referenced it against thousands of known compounds in the database, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Hours blurred into a focused trance, the only break the occasional stretch and the distant clang of a metal door from the cadaver storage facility. Then a match. The name flashed on the screen, polymer, synthetic, high-density, multi-layered. But it wasn't just any synthetic polymer. The specific elemental composition, the unique molecular bonds, pointed to something far more specialized. It was a rare, custom-engineered material designed for extreme durability and resistance to chemical degradation. My search narrowed, focusing on its applications. The results were consistent: aerospace components, high-performance medical implants, and industrial robotics. More specifically, high-end industrial robotics and specialized manufacturing tools. This wasn't something you'd find in a standard lab, not even one as cutting-edge as Thorne's. It was a proprietary material, likely patented, used by a very select group of manufacturers. My mind immediately jumped to OmniCorp. They were a massive conglomerate, heavily invested in advanced robotics and industrial R&D, and they were one of Thorne's primary funding sources. Their reputation for aggressive acquisition of intellectual property was legendary. The trace element wasn't just a clue. It was a signature, pointing directly to a corporate entity with deep pockets and a vested interest in Thorne's work. I spent the next hour digging, confirming OmniCorp's patent on a polymer with an identical spectral signature. My gut tightened. This wasn't a random accident. This was calculated. The next morning, I secured a meeting with Omnicorp's liaison, a woman named MS Albright. Her office was in a gleaming skyscraper downtown, all polished chrome and panoramic city views. He was impeccably dressed, him dark suit sharp, him smile practiced and a little too bright. "Reid, thank I for coming," he began, gesturing to a plush leather chair. Her voice was smooth, devoid of any discernible accent. "We're, of course, deeply saddened by Dr. Thorne's passing, a true visionary." "Indeed," I replied, settling into the chair. "I'm looking into the circumstances of his death. My investigation has led me to a particular material found at the scene, a synthetic polymer quite rare with a unique spectral signature." Her smile didn't waver, but I caught a flicker in her eyes, a micro-expression of something akin to recognition. "Oh, and what does that have to do with Omnicorp?" "The material matches a proprietary polymer patented by my company," I stated, watching her closely. "Used in my high-end industrial applications, I believe." She clasped her hands neatly on her desk, her posture perfectly composed. "Ah, yes, our Duraflex line. An excellent product, extremely resilient. We license it to a select few partners, of course, but it is indeed our intellectual property." She paused, her gaze steady. "How would that have ended up in Dr. Thorne's lab?" "That's what I'm trying to determine," I answered. "Did Omnicorp supply Dr. Thorne with any equipment or components containing this polymer?" "Not directly for his personal lab, no," she answered, perhaps a beat too quickly. "Our funding agreements were primarily financial, with some strategic R&D collaboration on the theoretical aspects of his work. Any physical materials would have been procured by his university department through standard channels. So, no Omnicorp personnel or contractors would have had cause to bring such a material into his lab." She leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting to one of almost exaggerated helpfulness. "Well, I can't speak for every individual, of course. Our engineers are constantly prototyping, testing. It's conceivable a sample might have been brought in for a demonstration, or even accidentally. Dr. Thorne was, after all, working on some incredibly advanced concepts. We were very interested in the potential applications of his research for our own robotics division." "Accidentally?" I pressed, my voice flat. "This material is designed for specific high-stress environments. It's not something I just accidentally leave lying around." Her smile returned, a little tighter this time. "Perhaps accidentally is the wrong word. More, an oversight, a misplaced sample. We have very strict protocols, of course, but human error is always a factor, isn't it? We'd be happy to provide with a full list of all Omnicorp personnel who had access to Dr. Thorne's lab, as well as any records of material transfers. We want to be fully transparent, Reid. Omnicorp values its reputation." He was being too cooperative, offering everything before I even had to ask, deflecting the implication of deliberate action with a veneer of eagerness. It felt like he was handing me a meticulously crafted narrative, a pre-written alibi. The emerald eye still haunted me, and now this polymer, a tangible link to a powerful corporation. The web was indeed tightening, and I had a feeling I was just beginning to see its true size. The faint sheen of the polymer still clung to my memory, an almost invisible fingerprint left by a killer who thought they were too clever. My initial analysis pointed to a highly specialized synthetic, not something you'd find in a hardware store. It had properties that hinted at extreme heat resistance and an unusual molecular structure. I'd spent the better part of the morning cross-referencing industry databases, trying to pinpoint its origin, sifting through manufacturers of advanced composites. Nothing quite matched. My gut told me I was looking in the wrong place. This wasn't industrial. This felt bespoke. It felt like something engineered for a very specific, perhaps even unique, purpose. Thorne's work was cutting-edge, often blurring the lines between engineering and biology. That thought led me down a different rabbit hole, specialized medical applications. I remembered a vague mention in a conference abstract years ago about a new polymer being explored for high-temperature biological containment, perhaps even advanced embalming techniques or prosthetic interfaces. The closest expert I knew on obscure biomaterials was Dr. Alastair Finch, a retired but still sharp materials scientist who sometimes consulted for the university's pathology department. He was usually found lurking around the University Medical School cadaver storage facility, a place that always smelled faintly of formaldehyde and sterile steel, where the air was always a few degrees colder than anywhere else on campus. I drove across town, the midday traffic a blur of exhaust and impatience. My mind was still running through molecular structures, trying to find a pattern, a match. As I neared the medical campus, a delivery van, a beat-up white panel truck with faded lettering, suddenly swerved out of a side alley. It was fast, too fast, cutting across 2 lanes without warning. I slammed on my brakes, the tires shrieking a protest against the asphalt, my own body lurching forward against the seatbelt. The truck's rear bumper missed my front fender by inches, a whisper of air disturbed by its passage. The driver didn't even glance in his rearview mirror, just kept going, disappearing around the next corner. It was too close, too abrupt. I've seen enough real accidents to know the difference between a clumsy mistake and something else. This felt like the latter, a warning, or just bad driving. I took a deep breath, the taste of adrenaline metallic on my tongue, and continued on. I found Dr. Finch in his usual spot, hunched over a microscope in a small, cluttered lab adjacent to the University Medical School cadaver storage facility. He was examining a piece of bone graft, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. After a brief technical discussion about the polymer's properties, he confirmed my suspicions. Definitely not off-the-shelf, Reid. The thermal stability, the unique refractive index. It screams custom synthesized. Probably a very small batch for a very specific application. My best guess, something in advanced tissue engineering or perhaps even a component for a bespoke diagnostic device, something that needs to withstand extreme conditions without leaching. He gave me a few names of research groups and specialized labs that might have the capability to produce such a material. It was a lead, a solid one. Back in my own lab, a small, insulated space where I kept my most sensitive equipment, the memory of the van incident still prickled at the back of my mind. I needed to focus. I pulled up Finch's suggestions, starting with the most likely candidates. I was about to dive into another database when I noticed it. My primary microscope, a precision instrument I used for the most minute examinations, was angled subtly differently. I always left it precisely aligned with the oculars facing the wall covered. Now the oculars were tilted perhaps 5 degrees to the right, barely noticeable. But I knew my lab. I knew every dust mott, every scratch on the benchtop. And the faint scent, a ghost of something floral and cloying that definitely wasn't my usual lab's antiseptic tang. Someone had been in here. Someone had touched my equipment. My jaw tightened. This wasn't an accident. The van, now this. Someone was sending a message or trying to disrupt me. I checked my files, my samples. Nothing seemed overtly disturbed. But that didn't mean nothing had been copied, scanned, or subtly altered. My meticulously organized workspace had been violated, a silent intrusion that spoke volumes. Thorne's death wasn't just a murder, it was a carefully orchestrated performance, and now someone was trying to pull me off the stage. I needed to push harder. I called Maya. Is everything okay? I need to see you, Maya, now, somewhere public away from the university. She agreed to meet me at a small, unassuming coffee shop a few blocks from the campus. When I arrived, he was already there, huddled in a corner booth, nursing a lukewarm tea. He looked genuinely terrified, a stark contrast to his earlier composed demeanor. "What is it, Reid?" he questioned, his voice barely audible. I leaned forward, keeping my own voice low. Someone was in my lab today, and I had a near miss with a vehicle that felt less like an accident and more like a warning. Someone is trying to stop me from finding something. Her face paled further. She wrung her hands. "Oh God, I knew it. I knew something was wrong." "Knew what, Maya?" I pressed, sensing a dam about to break. She took a shaky breath. Before Dr. Thorne died, a few times late at night I saw someone in the lab, not Dr. Thorne, not me, not the cleaning crew, someone else. They had a key card or knew how to bypass the system. I thought maybe it was just a visiting researcher, someone Dr. Thorne had authorized. But he never mentioned anyone, and they were so furtive. I didn't think much of it then. Dr. Thorne was always secretive, always had strange visitors. But after what happened, I got scared. I didn't want to say anything. I thought maybe I imagined it or misunderstood. But now, an unknown individual accessing Thorne's high-security lab after hours carrying a case. This wasn't a lab accident. My conviction solidified. I was hunting a killer, and they knew I was close. Her words, the lab assistant's whispered admission, had peeled back another layer of the illusion. An individual, not Thorne, had been in that lab post-hours carrying a case. It wasn't an accident. It was a staged disaster designed to look like one of Thorne's own experiments gone fatally wrong. The emerald flash from the security footage, that brief, almost imperceptible gleam, now felt less like a glitch and more like a signature, a chilling detail in a meticulously crafted lie. My immediate next step was to dive deeper into the lab's digital infrastructure. I needed to understand not just that someone had manipulated the system, but how. The lab's bespoke environmental controls and experimental apparatus were a spiderweb of interconnected sensors, automated protocols, and manual overrides, all controlled by a central server. This wasn't an off-the-shelf system. It was tailored to Thorne's specific, highly sensitive research. I sat hunched over a monitor in a temporary forensic workstation set up in the adjacent office, my eyes scanning lines of code, timestamps, and sensor readings. The digital forensics expert, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of network architecture, worked beside me. We'd pulled every byte of data from Thorne's main server, his personal workstation, and the environmental control units. "Here," she murmured, pointing to a segment of code. A series of commands initiated approximately 2 hours before Thorne's estimated time of death. They bypassed the standard safety interlocks. I leaned closer, tracing the digital breadcrumbs. What did they do? First, a gradual reduction in the oxygen levels within the containment chamber, slow enough not to trigger an immediate alarm, but enough to create a hypoxic environment over time. Then, a phased introduction of a specific gaseous compound, not lethal on its own, but highly reactive with the experimental reagents Thorne was using. My mind raced, connecting the digital manipulation to the physical scene. The faint, unusual burn pattern on the lab bench, the specific residue I'd found near Thorne's experimental setup. It wasn't a single, catastrophic explosion. It was a domino effect, a series of precisely timed events. And finally, the expert continued, her voice devoid of emotion, a spike in the chamber's internal pressure, followed by an electrical surge to the primary reaction vessel, the kind of surge that would cause a violent rupture if the contents were already volatile. It was brilliant in its cruelty, a meticulously choreographed sequence designed to mimic a catastrophic experimental failure. First, a gradual deprivation of oxygen, incapacitating Thorne slowly, making him disoriented and vulnerable. Then, the introduction of a sensitizing agent, followed by the final, explosive trigger. He wouldn't have known what was happening until it was too late, likely trying to correct what he perceived as a system malfunction, only to be caught in the final, fatal blast. The killer hadn't just murdered him. They'd orchestrated his demise like a twisted scientific experiment. This wasn't a random act. This was an intimate understanding of Thorne's specific research, his lab setup, and his daily protocols. Only someone deeply familiar with his work could have pulled this off with such precision. The air here was heavy with the scent of preservatives, a smell that always grounded me, reminding me of the ultimate fragility of the human body. I had arranged to meet with the lead pathologist, a gruff but insightful man named Dr. Chen, who had overseen Thorne's preliminary autopsy. "Reid," he greeted me, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, high-ceilinged room filled with shrouded forms. I explained, pulling out a small tablet displaying the atmospheric readings from the chamber. The oxygen depletion was gradual, followed by the introduction of a specific gas before the final event. I need to understand the physiological impact of that sequence. How long would it take for someone to become incapacitated, and what would their state be like just before the explosive rupture? Dr. Chen's gaze sharpened as he studied the data. Hypoxia, even mild, would induce confusion, impaired judgment, and motor skill degradation. He would have felt increasingly unwell, maybe a headache, dizziness. Then, with the sensitizing gas, if it interacted as you suspect with his reagents, the onset of symptoms could be accelerated. Respiratory distress, rapid heart rate, probably a sense of impending doom. He paused, his eyes drifting to a nearby covered form. He wouldn't have been able to react effectively to the final surge. His body would have been compromised, his mind struggling to keep up. The killer hadn't wanted a quick death. They had wanted Thorne to suffer, to be aware, even for a few agonizing moments, of his own impending destruction, unable to prevent it. As I walked out of the cadaver storage facility, the cold air outside felt almost warm against my skin. I now understood the how in excruciating detail. The engineered environment, the staged malfunction, the precise timing, it all painted a picture of a killer who not only knew Thorne's work, but also held a profound, disturbing understanding of human physiology under duress. This wasn't just a murder. It was a meticulously crafted obliteration, and the person behind it was far more dangerous than I had initially imagined. The net was tightening, but the identity of the puppeteer remained elusive, hidden behind layers of their own twisted genius. The sterile hum of the server racks in my temporary office did little to calm the restless gnawing in my gut. I sat slumped before the glowing monitors, Thorne's digital ghost splayed across them, Every line of code, every research note, every email account picked apart. The sheer agonizing precision of the murder, the slow burn that had consumed him, it kept replaying in my mind. No quick, merciful end. This wasn't about silencing him with a bullet or even a swift, accidental fire. This was about making him aware of his destruction. The killer hadn't just wanted Thorne's work, they had wanted him to suffer. And that meant the motive ran deeper than simple corporate espionage, deeper than just stealing blueprints for a new bioweapon. It felt personal, yes, but also strategic. A calculated act not just to acquire, but to prevent. To prevent what? The completion of his project, its public release, or perhaps something else entirely. I leaned forward, scrubbing a hand over my tired eyes. My colleague, the digital forensics specialist, had done a remarkable job extracting everything, but it felt like there was a shadow lurking in the data, a piece that kept eluding us. Thorne was brilliant, meticulous, but also paranoid. He had to be, given the nature of his research and its potential applications. He wouldn't have left his most sensitive thoughts, his true intentions, in plain sight. My gaze drifted to a series of older research logs dating back 5 years before Thorne's work became so heavily intertwined with Omni Corp. They were sparse, almost cryptic in places, detailing early experiments with cellular regeneration and targeted pathogen resistance. One entry, however, kept snagging my attention, a single handwritten note scanned and attached to a digital file. It mentioned alternative storage protocol and off-network terminal, followed by a series of coordinates. They weren't GPS coordinates, they looked like internal university facility codes. A sudden jolt went through me. An off-network terminal. Thorne had been too smart to put everything on a system that could be compromised. He'd have a secure, air-gapped backup for his most dangerous thoughts. And those coordinates, they looked familiar, not for a main lab, but for a specific, less trafficked sector of the university campus. I pulled up the campus map, cross-referencing the codes. My breath hitched as the location materialized on the screen, the University Medical School Cadaver Storage Facility. Of course, a place no one would think to look for a bioengineer's sensitive digital records. A place with specialized temperature controls, high security for obvious reasons, and a constant pervasive air of clinical finality. It was brilliant in its morbid obscurity. The drive across campus was short but felt endless. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays. The air grew colder as I neared the medical school complex, a collection of austere brick buildings that seemed to absorb the light. The cadaver storage facility itself was a windowless concrete annex tucked away behind the main anatomy building. A heavy, insulated door, steel-reinforced, was the only entrance. I showed my badge to the security guard, a man with tired eyes who barely glanced up from his paperback novel. "Here for a facility check," I mumbled, a lie that tasted like ash. He waved me through, clearly more interested in his story than in my presence. Row after row of stainless steel lockers lined the walls, each one a silent vault. My footsteps echoed, each one a stark intrusion. Finally, I found it a small, unassuming storage locker labeled simply Archive T. No name, just an initial. It was tucked away in a corner behind some older, disused anatomical models, almost an afterthought. My heart thrummed against my ribs. This was it. The locker was secured with a high-grade biometric lock, which Thorne, ever the meticulous planner, had anticipated. The scan note included a small, almost invisible detail, a specific sequence of pressure points on the lock's keypad, a manual override for emergencies, or in this case for his last, desperate attempt at truth. My fingers, surprisingly steady, followed the subtle indentations Thorne had marked in the scanned image. I pulled open the locker. Inside, nestled on a shelf, was a single old-model laptop, thick with dust, its power cable neatly coiled beside it. It was completely disconnected from any network cables, exactly as Thorne's note had implied. Air-gapped, secure. I connected the power, the faint whir of the cooling fan, a welcome sound in the stillness. The screen flickered to life, displaying a simple login prompt. Thorne's usual password didn't work. I tried several variations, growing increasingly frustrated. Green flashed, then granted access. The desktop was sparse, just a few folders. One labeled Project Chimera caught my eye. Inside, a single encrypted file. My hands flew across the keyboard, running the decryption software I'd brought, a process that felt agonizingly slow. The progress bar crawled, each percentage point a tiny victory, a step closer to the truth. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the file unlocked. It was a series of personal logs, dated in the weeks leading up to his death. Thorne's voice, clear and concise, filled the digital pages. He detailed his growing unease, his profound ethical concerns about the direction of his research, specifically its potential for weaponization. But it wasn't just his own work. He wrote about OmniCorp's clandestine funding of a separate, far more dangerous project. A project designed not for healing, but for control, for targeted biological suppression on a global scale. He hadn't just been working on a cure. He had been working on a way to expose the weaponization of similar technology. He had been planning to go public. Tomorrow, I will send the encrypted data packet to the independent journalists. The world needs to know what they are building and what they are willing to do to achieve it. Tomorrow. He'd been killed the day before he planned to release everything. The killer hadn't just wanted the research, they wanted to bury it and Thorne along with it. The meticulous, agonizing death wasn't just personal vendetta, it was a message. The stakes had just become impossibly high. I wasn't just looking for a killer anymore. I was looking for someone who had murdered to protect a global secret, a project far more sinister than I had ever imagined. And now I held the key to that secret. I was no longer just an investigator. I was a target. The air in the University Medical School cadaver storage facility hung thick and cold, a perpetual chill that seeped into my bones no matter how many layers I wore. It carried the faint, metallic scent of formaldehyde, a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and what came after. Rows of shrouded forms, each a silent testament to a life once lived, lined the high-ceilinged room, their outlines stark beneath the anemic fluorescent lights. It was a morbid place, but also a quiet one, devoid of the prying eyes and incessant chatter of the main lab or my usual office. Here, surrounded by the ultimate stillness, I could think. My laptop glowed, a small beacon in the gloom casting a pale light across my face. On the screen, a dizzying array of data spun into existence. Access logs for Thorne's lab, employee profiles from OmniCorp and the university, a matrix of specialized technical skills. I'd been at it for hours, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the gnawing certainty that the answer lay hidden within these digital archives. The killer hadn't just been smart, they'd been intimate with Thorne's world, a ghost in the machine. That meant they were on these lists. I scrolled through lines of code, timestamps, and biometric entries, a forensic archaeologist sifting through digital sediment. The initial attack on Thorne's systems, the precise, almost surgical disruption of the power grid, the subsequent data wipe, it all pointed to someone with an advanced understanding of both infrastructure and digital forensics. Not just a hacker, but an engineer, perhaps even a saboteur. I filtered the employee profiles, looking for specific certifications, for past roles that hinted at such specialized knowledge. The list, initially sprawling, began to shrink, shedding names like dead leaves. My gaze snagged on a cluster of profiles from OmniCorp, the corporate giant that had been funding Thorne's research. Of course, they had the deepest pockets, the most to gain, and potentially the most to lose. I cross-referenced their security clearances against the times of the initial system breaches. Several individuals had the necessary access, but only one possessed the unique combination of network architecture expertise and industrial control system familiarity that the sabotage would have required. His name was David Thorne, the OmniCorp liaison assigned to Aris Thorne's project. No relation, the file stated, though the coincidence of the surname felt like a cruel cosmic joke. I pulled up David Thorne's full profile. The initial summary was innocuous enough. Project manager, liaison, impressive academic record. But as I dug deeper past the public-facing accolades, the details began to ripple, disturbing the placid surface. There was a gap, a curious 5-year period in his early career listed vaguely as consultancy work abroad. My gut tightened. Consultancy work could mean anything. I ran a deeper search, cross-referencing his name with public records, old news archives, anything that might fill that void. It was a small article, buried deep in an obscure online journal from years ago, detailing a corporate espionage case. A rival tech firm had accused OmniCorp of stealing proprietary research, specifically regarding a nascent AI algorithm. And then a single grainy photo from a court sketch, pixelated and indistinct, but the set of the jaw, the sharp eyes, it was David Thorne. The pieces clicked into place with an icy precision. Covert operations. Intellectual property theft. An inside man intimately familiar with corporate secrets and the art of leaving no trace. He hadn't just been a liaison, he'd been a professional cleaner, a corporate assassin. And he'd been right there, embedded in Aris Thorne's project, monitoring every move, waiting for the opportune moment. My breath hitched. Aris Thorne had been about to release his research, to blow the whistle on something monumental. David Thorne, the corporate liaison, wasn't just after the research itself. He was there to ensure it, and Aris disappeared without a trace. The agonizing death, the meticulous cover-up, the deliberate message. It wasn't just a murder, it was an execution designed to be untraceable, a ghost story. This wasn't just about a stolen formula or a corporate secret anymore. And now I had pulled him into the light. I was no longer just an investigator, I was a target. Rows of stainless steel gurneys, some draped with heavy sheets, lined the vast room. I chose a workstation near the far wall, a spot that offered a clear view of the entrance and a measure of isolation. My breath plumed faintly in the frigid air as I arranged my equipment on a small, wheeled cart, a portable microscope, a set of specialized tweezers, and several sealed evidence bags. I wasn't here to analyze anything new, not really. This was a stage, and I was setting the scene for performance. My set to record was tucked discreetly behind a stack of old anatomy textbooks. I made sure my voice carried, a little louder than necessary as I spoke into it, feigning a call to a colleague. "Yes, I'm telling the preliminary spectrometry results are undeniable," I said, pacing a tight circle. "The structural integrity of this new polymer, it's beyond anything Aris was known to be working on. A complete paradigm shift, if this holds. It changes everything about his final project. This isn't just a breakthrough, it's a revolution." I paused, letting the words hang in the cold air, imagining them echoing down the long, silent corridors. I'm still cross-referencing the molecular markers, but I'm convinced. He found a way to stabilize it. This could be the key to the entire incident. I ended the call with a deliberate click, then busied myself with a clipboard, making a show of scribbling notes, occasionally glancing at the heavy steel door. My heart thrummed a low, steady rhythm against my ribs. It felt like I was holding a live wire, waiting for it to spark. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the ventilation system and the distant drip of condensation. Every minute felt like an hour. I tried to project an image of absorbed concentration, but every nerve ending was tuned, listening for the slightest deviation in the facility's quiet drone. Then a subtle shift. A faint scrape of shoes on concrete, too light to be the janitor, too hesitant for the attending medical staff. The main door, which I'd deliberately left ajar, eased open further. A figure slipped inside, moving with a cautious stealth that betrayed their intent. It was the brother. He wore a dark, heavy coat, his hands shoved deep into its pockets, and his eyes darted around the cavernous room, settling on me. He didn't approach directly. Instead, he veered towards a row of cadaver tables, pretending to examine a tag, but his gaze kept flicking towards my workstation, towards the evidence I had so carefully laid out. I kept my back mostly to him, feigning intense focus on a slide under the microscope, but I watched his reflection in the polished steel of a nearby gurney. He was tense, his jaw tight. He finally moved, a little too casually, towards my cart. "Still at it, Reid?" he wondered, his voice a low rumble, attempting an air of detached curiosity. "I heard you were making progress." I slowly straightened, turning to face him, a neutral expression on my face. "Progress often looks different from what people expect, doesn't it?" I replied, my voice calm, belying the surge of adrenaline. "Especially when you start connecting the dots that were deliberately scattered." He tried a thin smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "What dots are those, exactly?" The official report is quite clear. A tragic accident. An accident that seems to have a lot of strange coincidences attached to it, I countered, picking up a small, clear evidence bag. Inside, a minuscule, almost invisible fleck of material shimmered. "Like this." He frowned, leaning closer, his pretense of nonchalance slipping. "What is that?" "A polymer," I explained, holding it up, letting the fluorescent lights catch its subtle sheen. "An incredibly specific, high-tensile polymer. It's been showing up in some peculiar places, like the residue found on the access panel of Aris's lab, for instance. A panel that, according to the schematics, should have been inaccessible after the primary explosion." I paused, letting that sink in. And interestingly enough, it's also the exact same polymer I found embedded in the tread of my shoe after that rather unfortunate slip on the loading dock last week, and a trace of it on the faulty wiring of my lab's ventilation system, which almost caused a rather nasty chemical spill. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of genuine shock. He hadn't expected me to connect those dots. He thought my own little accidents were just that, accidents, designed to slow me down, perhaps even eliminate me without drawing suspicion. "You've been very busy, haven't you?" I continued, my voice steady, watching him closely, trying to clean up loose ends, "but you weren't quite meticulous enough. This polymer is unique, a proprietary blend developed by Omni Corp, and it has a very specific application, the containment of highly volatile biological agents." The color drained from his face, the casual facade shattered, replaced by a raw, desperate anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, Reid," he hissed, taking a step back. "You're making wild accusations." "Am I?" I held up another bag, this one containing a microscopic fragment of burnt fabric. This was recovered from Aris's lab, near the primary blast zone. It matches a specific type of protective suit used in high-risk biocontainment facilities. Not something Aris would have worn for his standard research, especially not with his specific protocols. I lowered my voice, every word a hammer blow. "He threatened to expose them, didn't he? Omnicorp. He found out about the bioweapon development. He was going to blow the whistle on their unethical research, and they tasked you with silencing him." His shoulders slumped, a sudden, profound defeat washing over him. "They offered me a way out of my debts, a position, influence. If I could just manage Aris." He was so righteous, so naive. He stumbled onto the bioweapon research, the real purpose behind the stabilized polymer project. He thought he could just walk away, expose them. He didn't understand the forces he was up against. They told me I had to neutralize him, make it look like an accident, a spectacular, self-inflicted one. They gave me the tools, the access, the precise timings. The polymer was part of it, a crucial component for the specific type of directed explosion needed to erase all traces of their work while making it look like Aris's own research went catastrophically wrong. He looked up, his gaze meeting mine, devoid of any pretense. The metallic scent of formaldehyde seemed to thicken, a pungent reminder of the cost of ambition and fear. The trap had sprung.